Hello, and welcome to Archive Dive. I'm Maria Lockwood, a reporter with the Superior Telegram. Each month, we dip into files on historic events, people, and places in Superior and Douglas County with local historians. Today, we're going to hitch a ride on the Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic Railroad. We're going to travel through some of Douglas County's vanished communities with Brian Paulson, a member of the Old Brule Heritage Society. Hi, Brian.
Good morning. Glad to be back.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your history with railroads?
Yeah, I have a 41 career in railroad business. I worked for Burlington Northern, which later became Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, working in the maintenance way department where we built railroad tracks and maintained existing railroad tracks. My father before me, I believe he started in 1927 working for the Northern Pacific. And his father before him started in the 1890s working for the Northern Pacific. So we have a long lineage, our family does, in railroading.
Is that what spurred your interest in locating all of these little communities?
It is. It certainly played into it. Working on some of the branch lines and main lines through my career, you'd always come across along the tracks or what looked like could have been a little community or homes or things of that nature. At that time, my interest ended there, but as time went by, I developed more of an interest and started to learn that, well, by golly, there was actually small settlements, small communities and hamlets that were located there and now pretty much forgotten and disappeared.
Right. And instead of calling them ghost towns, you call them abandoned communities.
Yes, vanished communities, abandoned communities, and that's more for accuracy point of view. That's because these were not actually towns. They were not incorporated towns. They were all smaller hamlets or settlements that were located within the large town of Brule. The town of Brule at that time covered, the boundaries were from the Superior city limits all the way eastward to the Bayfield County line, and on a north-south line from the shores of Lake Superior all the way down to what is now Highway B. So it covered, the township of Brule at that time covered about the northern third of Douglas County, and all of these settlements that we are going to be talking about were located within that expansive town of Brule. Okay.
And the railway we are going to be following today was known locally as the South Shore Railroad, correct?
Correct. Its official name was Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic, DSS&A. For short, but a lot of the locals just referred to it as the South Shore Railroad.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to start our trip in Superior, correct?
Correct. And just to take a minute here to explain that the reason why these communities formed out there is because of the people were attracted by the logging boom that started around 1895 in our area here. Really brought a lot of people into the area. And then at the same time, the railroads were showing up in the area, and that kind of determined where all these people were going to settle simply due to the source of transportation that the railroads provided. At that time, there was almost a non-existent network of roads out in the county. So the railroads provided a very important source of transportation. These new settlers wanted to utilize that source of transportation. So that's why they settled along these rail lines.
And the railroads were able to create these communities by just coming through.
Yep. Just about all the railroads had a general policy of building a depot or depot-like facility about every 2 to 5 miles along their tracks. And that was to serve their own purposes as well, but these depots would act as an interface between the citizens, the public living out there, and their railroad. They could buy their passenger tickets right at the depot. If they had goods to either ship out of town or if they had goods coming into town, it would all be picked up at the depot, hauled by rail, because that was about the only source of transportation available to them.
Right.
So that's why there were so many towns, again, due to the fact that these railroads built their depots every 2 to 5 miles.
All right. So about every 2 to 5 miles along the South Shore Railway, we're going to be finding a town.
Correct.
Okay.
And that holds true with the rest of the railroads too, that the other 3 mainline railroads that built into our area. Pretty much the policy every 2 to 5 miles.
Okay. Excellent. Well, shall we take a trip?
Let's. Again, when I've given this presentation in the past, done it live in front of a group of people, so I had the ability to use a PowerPoint presentation complete with maps and documents and things of that nature. Since this is an audio format here today, we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit. So if we can imagine ourselves buying a ticket at the South Shores Ticket Depot there in East End Superior, and we're going to board the Limited, which was actually a train that operated in 1902. We're pulling out of Superior at 4:10 in the afternoon, and we're going to kind of sit back in our coach and see what kind of sights we can see out our window as we travel down the tracks. Now, as we get out of Superior, after climbing the long grade from the shores of Lake Superior, we reach the summit of the large hill, and there was a community there. The first community we come across was named Rock Crusher, and it's right on the station sign there for the railroad. In 1913, the station name would be changed to Andersonville, and that appears on a number of our old maps. And what went on here, why this community had settled there, less because of the logging operations, but more because of the stone quarry, which was starting to be built in that area. A lot of the stone that was mined out of that quarry would be used for ballast material for the South Shore Railroad and other railroads in the area. More rock would be crushed and used in the building of Old Highway 11, also known as Grand Avenue, and later Highway 53. And a lot of our town roads out there had been built using the material of the crushed rock that come out of that Andersonville or Rock Crusher quarry.
It was aptly named.
Yes, and it was renamed after a gentleman by the name of Sam Anderson who run the quarry. And it's there's a Sam Anderson Road out there. If you travel in the area, it's a quite long, straight road in the area out there. And
does that is part of that in Rock Crusher / Andersonville?
Yes. Yep, okay. It goes right by there. And just to give you a size of that operation of the quarry out there and why the town actually settled there is, and this is an article that comes from the Duluth News Tribune dated February 26, 1905, and it talks about a fire that destroyed some of the buildings that were owned by the quarry company there. The main building, lodging building, burnt, and the building was large enough that it housed 100 men. So that gives you an idea of the size of the operation there, if they had 100 people working there. And then, of course, if you have that number of people there, sometimes their families were there. Again, not a huge settlement, but it was very busy. They still do crush some stone out there even to this day. But yeah, it was an active community during its time. And we're going to continue to head a little bit farther east now on the South Shore. The next community we come to is known as Rockmont. However, the journey we're on is 1902, so that community was named Holmes at the time, Holmes. And in 1896, the name changed to Thomas. Again, this is one of those communities that changed its names every few years just because of the influence of someone else that may have come into town that had either deeper pockets or some political influence or influence in the lumber or railroad business. But the towns were renamed often. But yeah, it was renamed Thomas. Then a few years later, it was renamed Rockmont, not Rockmount, as a lot of people pronounce it. It's Rockmont. But that basically is an explanation for that. Is it's built on top of the huge hill there, overlooking Lake Superior, and that actually had a pretty good settlement of people there. There was actually 2 rail lines that served Rockmont. There was both the Chicago Northwestern, also known as the Omaha, and the South Shore Railroad. You were lucky in those days to have 1 rail line serving your community. This one had 2 rail lines serving their community. So the town grew quite quickly. I even have an old post office handbook here from 1895 that states that the population of Holmes, later Rockmont, was 125 people. That's back in 1895. But some of the other facilities that were located here was a school. The school building still stands, but of course that school had been rebuilt 3 times over the years. But they had a school, a church, a post office, lumber company, a hotel, blacksmith shop, always the saloon. There was a work farm out there, a county-run work farm for prisoners that were detained by the county, a poultry farm, and a stockyard. But that area out there is still known by many, by locals, as Rockmont, and it's pretty much located along the old Highway 53 out there where the South Shore tracks ran.
Okay. You say the school building is still there?
School building still stands. It's the third school that was located in Rockmont.
Is it a home now, or is it empty?
It was a home. I'm not sure if it's a duplex right now or not. I know it's still occupied.
Okay.
But yeah, it was the home the last time I seen it.
And that was the third school?
That was the third
built there?
school. As is the case with a lot of these small towns in the early days, they had the old one-room schoolhouse. And as the population grew, they become inadequate. So maybe a two-room schoolhouse was built. And eventually this larger two-story brick building was built, which still stands to this day.
Okay.
But that's a town that lived on into even into the 50s. There was a lot of activity in Rockmont. It survived the end of the logging boom and maintained a life even afterwards.
Excellent.
Now we're going to move a little bit farther on the South Shore, heading southeast, and we come to Middle River Station. And a lot of people might confuse this with Middle River, the little settlement of a town of what we refer to as the town of Middle River to this day. However, Middle River Station was kind of located out in the sticks. It was actually where the South Shore tracks crossed the Middle River. They had a facility there, a watering tower, because of the availability of water there. And there was a small coaling tower where they would refuel the steam locomotives. There was a school there and a depot with which was staffed during the day by a depot agent. So that in itself tells us that there was a bit of a population there, that they would have a depot agent there during the day. Also at this site was a spur line that come off the South Shore's main line that run to the northeast, and it went into the Chippewa mine. Chippewa mine was an underground copper mine that did fairly good business on and off throughout the years, always being bought and resold and bought by different companies. And but they worked for about 15 years. They had about 26 men that worked at that quarry there, or not quarry, but copper mine. So there was business to be had there at this Middle River Station, just due to the traffic that went into the copper mine there, the Chippewa copper mine.
Definitely. Were there many copper mines here in Douglas County?
There actually was. I don't know the number exactly, but if I had to guess, I'm going to say there was probably 20 or better. Chippewa mine was one of the bigger of them. The Percival mine north of Brule was certainly a bigger one. There were many smaller ones located, if you get down around Gordon, even in the Lake Amnicon area. And Amnicon, where Highway 2 and 53 meet, there was a couple mines there as well. But those were smaller mines, more experimental. They did dig some copper out of them, but it just was too expensive to get the copper out of the ground. The more busier mines, again, were the Percival mine, the Chippewa mine, and there was a few others to the south of us.
Okay.
Now we're going to continue our journey, and we're still heading southeast on the South Shore, and one of the next communities we come to is Berg Park. Love to have seen Berg Park when it was in operation. It's 2 miles from Middle River Station, 2 miles to the southeast. The story with that town is the DSS&A South Shore Railroad built their main line through the area there in 1892, but it wasn't until 1894 that an early settler by the name of John Nutt sold the South Shore some land, and the railroad built a depot on that land, a siding and a spur track. And eventually they built a stockyard for, housing cattle and sheep that were shipped in and out of town. Eventually a freight house was built there as well. So the railroad had a pretty good operation in town there. Interesting story, as with other towns, as to how they got their name. And that's certainly true with Berg Park. The settlement was initially called Nutt, named after John Nutt, who initially sold the railroad some land to build their facilities there. But by the 1890s, residents petitioned the Postal Service for a post office. And my understanding, there already was in the state of Wisconsin a community called Nutt, so they couldn't duplicate that.
Oh.
So they had to try to come up with another name, the Postal Service did. And that's where the story gets a little more interesting. There was an early settler, German-born man by the name of Herman Berg, B-U-R-G, who built a large sawmill at this site. Mr. Berg ran the sawmill there for a few years before selling it to a man by the name of Howard Berg. Had the same sounding last name, but his name was spelled B-E-R-G. He operated that mill for the next 20 years. So in the decision by the Postal Service to come up with a name for this, their new post office in the town there, they decided on Berg, B-E-R-G, after the second owner of the sawmill. Then they gussied up that name a little bit and called it Berg Park. So that's how Berg Park got its name, and the names of the first settler there, John Nutt, and the name of the first man who built the original sawmill there, Herman Berg, they were discarded, and they went with the second owner of the sawmill and chose to name the town after him. Again, pretty busy little town here. There was a boarding house, a general store, a slaughterhouse, a school, and that school actually remained in operation for about 30 years. So that tells you that they kept the population on there significant enough to maintain a school for over 30 years. But however, the school eventually would close, and the students went to Rockmont and neighboring Wentworth after that. But a little interesting story about Berg Park there, and it was pretty busy. It, again, grew legs after the logging period ended and lasted up roughly until the 40s.
Okay. You mentioned that you really would have loved to have seen Berg Park. Was there something about it in
Well,
specific?
In a way, I live about a mile to a mile and a half to the north of Berg Park.
Oh.
And again, there's no sign of any community that was there. You can still see the abandoned South Shore Railroad tracks. That was abandoned in 1932 and ripped up in 1934. So you can see the roadbed there yet. But since it's just so close to where I live, I thought it would be interesting to have gone back in time to visit that town. Like I say, it was one that lasted a little bit longer, certainly outlasted the logging period, and continued in operation up, until the railroad disappeared there. Then it slowly started, the population started to dwindle.
Right. What's our next stop?
Next town that we come to, Dobie. Again, a pretty interesting story there. That was one of the larger little settlements that existed out in the county. If you want to know exactly where Dobie is, you'd have to go on Highway D, as in David, south of Poplar, about 2.5 miles, and you'll cross the old South Shore Railroad grade. I believe it's called the South Shore Road right now, or South Shore grade that crosses Highway D. And the community itself sat on the northeast quadrant of that intersection there. Actually, a lot more is known about the namesake, who the town is named after, than the town itself. There's just not a lot of documentation about the town, but we do know quite a bit about who the town was named after, and that was David Dobie, who was a prominent figure in the area before and after the turn of the century. Even though this community remained intact for more than 30 years, it seems that we know more about him than the town. We know that Mr. Dobie come to this area, and he worked as a secretary for the Frederick Weyerhaeuser Company. And a secretary back in those days was actually a prominent figure in a company. It's kind of akin to what a vice president would be in a company or a corporation today. But in those days, they were referred to as secretaries. But Dobie worked for the Weyerhaeuser concern, and for some reason, Mr. Dobie and Mr. Weyerhaeuser had a falling out of ways, and Dobie struck out on his own. And one of his first ventures was in the sawmill and the logging trades, with a main focus on the logging transportation. In other words, he went on to build himself a logging railroad, which carried the logs from the Poplar, Dobie area, Hawthorne area, all the way down to the northern shore of Lake St. Croix, where these logging cars were dumped into the lake, and the logs were driven across the lake, fed into the river, St. Croix River there, and driven all the way down to the mills down around the cities. So it's kind of interesting that the logs cut from our own backyard ended up way down in the cities to be milled down there. But that was David Dobie's railroad. And because of all the logging activity in that area, a town settled and grew and prospered actually fairly well for quite some time. Eventually, though, the logging business would come to an end. But Mr. Dobie Unlike a lot of his the other folks that owned logging companies and businesses, Mr. Dobie stayed in the area because he wanted to promote this area. He really believed in this area. So he and his wife stayed in the area here, and they formed the Northern Wisconsin Colonization Company. In other words, it was akin to a real estate company, and he promoted the growth of this area here, and he was a strong supporter of that. He was involved in local politics, believed in civic responsibility. So he did a lot of good things for our area here. Whereas, like I said, a lot of these other timber barons left the area when the logs were depleted.
Okay. Was the Dobie Swamp area also named after him then?
Yes, and that's actually the headwaters of the Poplar River at that huge, expansive Dobie Swamp. So it sounds rather odd that there would be a town that would form there, but there was plenty high land that bordered the Dobie Swamp, where the white pine grew, and that's why the town settled where it did there.
It's nice to know that some of them stuck around, huh?
And again, if you drive by there today, you would have no inkling that there was ever a town there. The main thrust of the town kind of sat off the intersection there of Highway D and the South Shore Railroad tracks, but there were plenty of buildings around there. There is still, just to the northeast there, a large concrete structure, and that was the base of the sawmill that operated back in around 1900. Other than that, there's really no semblance of any town that was there.
All right, moving on.
Moving on, we've pretty much moved through the Dobie Swamp, and we're kind of heading up to somewhat higher ground. About 3 miles east of Dobie, we come to another station called Steele, and there was actually a little town that formed around Steele there. And Steele was named, as far as best as we can figure, after a man and his wife, Mr. Eric and Bessie Steele, were one of the first settlers that settled in the area there. Again, they were tied in with the logging business and sawmill business. He built a large sawmill just on the northern portion of Steele Lake. The Steele Lake shows up on the map. It's a little bit removed from any roadways back there, but eventually a town would settle around that the depot that was built there by the South Shore and Mr. Steele's sawmill. The kids that grew up in the area actually had to be bused to the original Carl von Linn school. And I do have documents here that showed that Mrs. Steele, Bessie Steele, was the transportation advisor. You couldn't call her a bus driver because they didn't have buses back then, but she provided transportation for the kids to get to that 2 miles to the Carl von Linn school. And these documents show that she was even paid extra in the winter for providing an adequate stove to put in that little covered wagon, the sled that transported the kids to school. So once in a while you'll come across these here interesting documents that add a little bit of a story to some of these people and some of these towns.
Gives you a glimpse into what life might have been like back then.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. The trips to school in the summertime or in the spring and fall, I should say, were on wagon, and in the winter in a sled or a sleigh. And the kids were lucky to have heat in that sleigh. So Mrs. Steele was paid extra for providing that service. But there again, that town kind of started to dwindle after the logging days. There was hardwood logging that did go on in the area. But once the railroad tracks were ripped up in 1934, that pretty much was spelled the doom for the town of Steele. Again, if you drive by there to this day, there's really nothing recognizable that would ever tell you that there was a town located there. So we're heading a little bit farther east now, and we go through Lake Nebagamon. Of course, Lake Nebagamon is doing still pretty good to this day. It's an existing town, so we aren't really going to go into any history on it, other than as we're looking out our windows going through town, we can see the huge Weyerhaeuser mill there. And, of course, there was a large passenger station there just because there was a large population there, a lot of people departing town, coming into town. And so Lake Nebagamon did real well. But we're going to continue on through Lake Nebagamon, and we come to smaller settlement located, as you might say, out in the middle of nowhere. It's about 3 miles to the east of Lake Nebagamon on the South Shore Railroad tracks. And this little town was initially called Orville. That was established in 1892 by the South Shore Railroad. A depot was built there. Within a few years, it was renamed Cobb. And again, by 1912, it was renamed Experiment. And I have absolutely no documentation on this site other than the Nebagaman Creek, which is a beautiful creek that flowed nearby there. It was a good source for water for the settlers there. And there was some beautiful farmland that was cleared just to the south, or excuse me, to the east and the southeast there. And those fields now belong to the real large Link Brothers farms out there. But to drive by that area today, there's no indication whatsoever that there was ever a community there. Again, nature has reclaimed itself at that site. The last name was Experiment.
And you have no idea why it was named Experiment.
No, other than I'm thinking that it was due to the fact that they started to build farmland there.
So it was
or clear farmland there, and it was like
experiment?
Experimental farms type of thing.
Okay.
Which you see just the side of Ashland, the Experiment farm there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my assumption anyways.
We'll never know.
We will never know. Now we're going to continue a little bit farther out of Cobb, in fact 2 more miles to the east, and we come upon the settlement of LeClaire. Kind of interesting little town. LeClaire was located on what is now called the After Hours Road, which is just 1 mile north of Highway B. This community covered a rather large area and extended westerly all the way over to what's now known as the Sheezer Road. LeClaire come to be when a man by the name of William Holton, who was the owner of several sawmills in Wisconsin and Minnesota, organized the Lake Superior Piling Company. Mr. Holton and his company purchased the land where the town would locate because of the tall and the straight white pine that grew there. And at that time, there was a big demand for these tall, straight white pines because of the docks were being built in Superior and Duluth and Ashland and Bayfield, and they required those tall, straight white pines. So the market was there, and that's why Mr. Holton decided to build at that particular mill there. Mr. Holton asked his brother-in-law, a man by the name of Enoch Harvey, who worked for him for 25 years down at his mill in Elk River, Minnesota, to come up here and help him organize and to build this Lake Superior Piling Company. The company began operations in 1899 and started producing the long pilings and poles used for the bridge and dock building. And they actually did very well for a few years. But by 1903, just in that 5-year period, they had depleted the highest and the tallest of the white pine, and their resource was gone. So almost overnight, they had to load up all of their equipment, their mill, and buildings, and a lot of their manpower onto a South Shore train, and they moved everything down south, and they relocated down in Louisiana, and to this day, that same company is in operation down there, cutting cypress trees. So that company's lasted 120 some years, still in existence today.
Is that typical for these sorts of, is that another reason why they ended so abruptly, is because the resource that they were dependent on was suddenly gone?
Yep. Yes, that is the main reason why a lot of these towns just disappeared overnight, is because that resource, the white pine, was gone. In certain areas, if the soil conditions were right and drainage was right, people would clear the cutover land and start farming, and that would almost trigger a second wave of immigration into the area here, is the farming. In fact, that's how my great-grandparents got come here, is because of the farmland that was available to them. However, they had to clear the farmland, and that was years and years of backbreaking work for them. But to answer your question, that pretty much put an end to the logging, or to some of these towns, is when the logging period ended.
What's next?
The next town we come to, if you can call it a town, was a small settlement called McDougall. Really never got its feet off the ground, but a little bit of interesting history with the man himself, who the town was named after, and that's Alexander McDougall, which a lot of local people here know as the designer and builder of all the whalebacks. But he had grandiose plans of a settlement there, right where the South Shore Railroad crossed the Brule River, and he had plans of damming the river at a number of locations in an effort to provide electricity for new residents.
Very forward thinking.
Very forward thinking. One of these entrepreneurs But yeah, he wanted to introduce people into that area. And he also knew that the people that were already located there were very wealthy people that had started some of these clubs, like the Winnebago Club. There was a number of clubs out in the area that were formed by very wealthy people from the Minneapolis, St. Paul, Chicago area. And Winnebago Club being one of them. There were many others that were established along the river there. So Mr. McDougall was hoping to attract more of this wealth from these southern cities into that area too. But as it were, it was a long political process, legal process, which he eventually lost out on. And I think my understanding is he built one or two small dams, but he never got the authority to build larger dams to really produce electricity on a large scale. So that town and that settlement, basically a grandiose plan of Mr. McDougall's. There was a small contingency of buildings in the area there, but nothing become of it too much because he just didn't get the permission to build his dams there. Next community, very close by to McDougall, less than a mile away, is Winnebago. This was located right close to where the South Shore Railroad crossed the river, just to the east side of the river. And again, Winnebago attracted many well-to-do families from southern Minnesota, and southern Wisconsin and Chicago areas. A lot of wealth coming up again because of these clubs that were formed there. In the spring of 1884, a little bit of the history of one of these clubs. In the spring of 1884, two residents of Minnesota, one of them Christopher O'Brien, who was an attorney and mayor of St. Paul, and Edward Saunders, an associate of the Great Northern Railroad founder James J. Hill, went on a fishing trip to the Brule River and returned to the river many times after that because they were so enamored by the beauty there and the fishing that the river and the land around it provided. And that's how the Winnebago Club got its start. And another little interesting side story here, when Mr. Saunders was coming up here on one of his trips, he brought his family up by train. And the daughter of the family, recounted in later years of going down the railroad tracks, traveling down by train, looking out the window and seeing the Native Americans. So it was still so to speak, the Wild West scene here at that time, back in 1884. But that's pretty much how Winnebago was formed because of, for one, the logging, and then also all these clubs with the wealthy owners that settled in the area there.
Was it sort of a stop for people as they were coming along? You had mentioned that to me before, that it was stagecoaches would come there, or
not so much at Winnebago. That was another location, but we certainly know that the presidents certainly come through Winnebago on their way to Cedar Lodge.
Okay.
In fact, that's how the depot got restored there back in the 1930s, 1928, I should say, is because the government wanted to really pretty up the community there, so they put a lot of money in at the town, and the railroad did as well, to clean everything up because of the arrival of our president in 1928.
Was that the one that Calvin Coolidge?
Coolidge was one of the presidents. Yep. And that was the one that come there in 1928. He had the summer White House up here in Superior.
But he never went in the depot, correct?
Well, he may have went in the depot, but the South Shore Railroad spent a lot of money and time and manpower fixing up their railroad coming out of Superior all the way down to Winnebago, hoping to make it look good for the president. Well, it turned out that once he got here, he took a motor pool out there, but his wife took the train out there.
So their efforts did not go in vain.
No. But in the end, the Coolidge Memorial Highway was improved, which had been a dirt road before that. That's now Highway P out there. So it was because of those efforts to impress the president that some of the roadways were improved out there, and Highway P was built, or paved, I should say, because of his visit. But that's basically the last town that we're going to visit on the South Shore Railroad. There are some that we did skip that were much smaller.
I was going to ask, there are a couple small towns. Do you want to mention those briefly? They're towns that you don't have a lot of information on, correct?
Yes, one of them being Hoyt, and again, no documentation of that other than it does show up on the old county maps. It does show up on the station roster, and some of these little settlements were basically because the logging railroads had tracks that both joined the main line South Shore and also crossed. So they had to have some kind of traffic control system there. And that's why there was maybe a small settlement there, but they certainly do show up on some of the old maps. Hoyt is one of them.
And where is Hoyt in relation to the other towns?
Hoyt would have been between Dobie and Berg Park.
Okay.
Yep. And then there was also Carroll, was another town. Same story with that, if you can even call it a settlement. The logging railroads had tracks that both joined and crossed the mainline South Shore. And they had to have some method of traffic control there so trains wouldn't collide at the crossing diamonds. So they had people there to basically control the traffic that was, the rail traffic that was in the area there. But yeah, that's about the only two that we really skipped that I just don't have information on as far as how they got their names or how long they lived. But
okay.
And again, there are smaller towns as we go into Bayfield County. It continues every few miles. There were small towns, but just for our sake of discussion today, we were covering the towns in the Old Brule Township. But yeah, these towns continued eastward all the way to the East Coast, actually.
Okay. And this line is kind of interesting to you because it goes right by your home, correct?
Yeah, it traveled about 1.5 miles south of where I live now. And lived a rather short life. It was built in 1892 and was abandoned in 1932, so it only lived a 40-year existence, and it was torn up 2 years after it was abandoned. But a lot of history there along that line.
Thank you for listening to us, and thank you for taking us on another railroad trip.
Okay, thank you for having me, and it's always a pleasure to share a bit of our local history with the folks.
All right. Thanks for listening to Archive Dive. New episodes are available monthly at superiortelegram.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, email me at mlockwood@superiortelegram.com.